All right, everybody, welcome back. Wyatt here again at the Team O'Neill Rally School. Had a few questions for a car setup video. How do you set a car up for racing on different surfaces and different conditions, and when things change, what do you change with the car? How do you take a normal production vehicle and set it up for success out on a rally stage or out on a track or anything else? And really it's the same, if you've got a UTV or an ATV or a dirt bike or even a mountain bike, if your shocks are adjustable and that kind of stuff. The old joke was if you make it adjustable, people will adjust it wrong, and that's often the case. We get a lot of people that come up here with a rally car and they're like, hey, can you sort this thing out for us a little bit and show us what to do as far as car setup, testing, and that kind of thing. So we've compiled a bunch of information, and here's the sheet. I just shot this video where I went through and kind of did all of this stuff and realized it takes you 15-20 minutes of watching the video to get all the info. So if you want to sneak attack and just kind of take a screenshot of this and go on about your business for the day, here it is. But if you want to hang out with me for a second, I'm going to explain this and we'll go through some of the details of how to set a vehicle up for racing. This is a very sort of basic street car going racing thing. We're not talking about building a tube frame car in your garage and setting up, crazy stuff and that sort of thing. But, you're taking a normal car, you want to go racing with it. What do? This is the list, so ignore this part for right now. This is the list you got to go through. Spring rates all the way through to tire pressures and brake bias, and you're going to do it in this direction, right? So start at the top and work your way down. Later on, I'm going to talk about making adjustments, and you're going to do it in the opposite direction. And the reason for that is these are the hard things to change. And they take time, and it's a little more involved, and these are the easiest things to change. So when you set a car up, you do the hardest stuff first down to the easiest stuff, but then when you're out on the track and the car's misbehaving a little, fix the easiest stuff first and work your way backwards. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go through very quickly and just, define each of these terms. Spring rate essentially is how hard or soft your springs are. In most racing cars, you run about a 50% stiffer spring than stock. So if you have a 300-pound spring, most racing applications, you'd have a 450-pound spring for the same vehicle. That's very different, and we'll talk about it in a second. If you're going ice racing or track racing, you're going to have completely different setups. But that's just a general guideline if you want kind of a do-it-all suspension, about 50% stiffer than stock for most vehicles. For most production cars. Some cars have very stiff suspension, and don't worry about it. Ride height, again, just to define the term, is how tall or how low to the ground you set your car up. If you have adjustable spring perches and adjustable things, typically for a rally car, most racing cars go pretty close to stock. Rally car's a little higher, track car's a little lower, but really all of your suspension geometry is designed around that ride height. So you see people that lower cars a lot, well, it doesn't turn right and all the angles are weird and you got to adjust everything else. And the same with people that jack cars up and trucks up. All of a sudden it drives like a basket case. So if you're setting something up in your garage, ride height close to stock, within that realm, and everything will work like it's supposed to. Drive shaft angles, all kinds of different stuff. Excuse me. Sway bars, everybody knows what a sway bar is. A sway bar is there so that as you turn or hit a bump, as your right side suspension compresses, if the right side goes up and the left side does nothing, you're going to get a lot of body roll and lean, and it's going to be a little weird. So they essentially connect it with a bar so that when one suspension compresses, the other one does as well. You can have very stiff big sway bars, you can have very skinny little flexi sway bars. So you can adjust that, how much as one compresses, the other one goes up with it. A very stiff sway bar, they'll compress at similar rates. A smaller sway bar will allow a little more of this. In rally cars, sometimes we disconnect the sway bar completely, and for off-road purposes, so you get that articulation where one wheel can go up and the other one doesn't. It stays on the ground. So like if you hook a corner, that tire will drop and the other one won't do anything weird on you. But that's what a sway bar is. Your alignment The main things we're worried about: caster, camber, and toe, in that order. Caster is typically not adjustable without some real fabrication work, or you can oftentimes find caster plates, but essentially caster is the angle of your suspension mounting point, specifically in the front but also in the rear, from where the shock mounts at the top and goes down to the center axis of the hub and the wheel and everything. It's that angle is caster. The more caster you have, the more the wheel wants to be straight, which is very nice. You get a very good steering feel when you have a little more caster. Most sports cars, racing cars have more caster than, you know, a non-performance based car. So if you're taking a non-performance based car and turning it into a rally car, even, you know, a Subaru Impreza or something like that, if you can add a little more caster in, that helps. But typically there's only so much you can do, so, and it's difficult to do. It's at the top of the list because of that. So moving along, you know, more caster is typically better. Camber. Camber is how vertical your front tires are. Also your rear tires, but most people worry much more about the front tires, how vertical your front tires are. So 0 degrees of caster would be dead straight, perfect, you know, straight vertical front tires. Negative camber, I'm sorry if I just said caster, camber. Negative camber means the front tires, the tops are a little closer together than the bottoms, and positive camber is when the tops are a little further out than the bottoms. Most racing cars are going to be set up either straight or with slight negative camber, hardly ever with positive camber. Not a lot of reason for that. I'm sure somebody was going to say, you know, the front tires are drag cars or who knows what, maybe they do it, but that's what camber is. Toe is the alignment of your front tires with each other in the plane of steering and horizontally. So dead straight 0 degrees of toe means both front tires are pointed perfectly straight when the steering wheel is straight. Toed out means the front tires are further away than the back, so the car wants to wander a little more, it turns in a little better. Toe in would mean that the front of the tires are closer together than the back, which means it doesn't turn as well, but it's more stable at high speed. And we'll talk about when you can adjust that toe as well. That's easy. Your tie rod ends are usually adjustable. You can adjust the toe pretty simply. This is where it gets a little tricky. Shock compression. So your shock, you can adjust most of the time when you get decent racing suspension. You can adjust the dampening force of both when the shock tries to compress and when it tries to rebound. So compression is the squishing of a shock essentially, and rebound is the reopening of a shock after you hit a bump or exit a corner or something like that. Most good racing suspension, you know, some of the times that you just have a compression adjustment and a rebound adjustment. The higher end stuff, you have a high speed compression adjustment and a low speed compression adjustment. High speed compression, sorry, let's go in order. Yes, high speed compression is when you hit a bump or a rock or something that tries to compress your shock very quickly. So pothole, rock, bump, that sort of thing, high speed compression. And you can adjust by turning up or down the resistance that your shock has to that force. Turning it up is going to make it stiffer, and turning it down is going to make it faster or lighter or smoother so that there's less resistance to those motions as you hit bumps. Low speed compression is when the shock tries to compress in a more normal low speed way. It's not driving speed, it's the speed at which the shock tries to compress. So low speed compression you're going to notice when you brake, when you accelerate, when you turn, when you're putting smoother loads on the suspension and it's trying to compress that shock. You can adjust the resistance of that shock, the damping of that shock to that force. Turning it up will make it stiffer to compress. Turning it down will make it lighter and faster to compress under those braking loads. So you crank it way up, when you brake it's going to feel stiff. When you crank it way down, when you brake it's going to transfer more weight. So that's low speed compression adjustment. Rebound is the same way. High speed rebound is, you know, you've hit a bump, when you drive over that rock, how fast does that shock open back up again? And turning it up will slow that down, turning it down will speed that up. Same with low speed rebound. You know, after you've braked, when you release the brake, does the car squish back up quickly or does it come up a little more slowly? and that's all adjustable as well. Tire pressures, everybody knows what tire pressures are, how much air is in your tires. Just know that and this stuff really is all temperature relative, because it's gas, it's either compressed air or nitrogen, but specifically compressed air changes a lot with temperature. Your shock pressures change a lot with temperature. A hot shock is going to behave very differently than a cold shock. The tire pressures are even more so, where you may have 25 psi in your tire at a cold temperature. You drive that car to Florida and it's 90 degrees out, you might have 30 psi. You go around a track a dozen times, it might have 35 psi in it. But then you drive home to New Hampshire where we are and it's February, and all of a sudden the tire is 25 pounds again. So that's something that's always changing. You need to monitor nitrogen in your tires, helps a lot, but still keep an eye on it. And brake bias is the final thing. So as you set a car up, you go all the way down to brake bias, which is typically adjustable inside the car. Brake bias, you are adjusting how much brake pressure goes to the front versus the rear calipers when you hit the brake pedal. So when I brake hard, I can adjust. Do I want more front brake, lots of front brake, or not so much front brake and some more rear brake for different situations? So when you set a car up, you basically go down that line. Where do you set things? At factory sort of settings at first. Your spring rates, your ride height, your sway bar, keep your sway bars, align your car as the manufacturer intended, do your shock settings as comes with the booklet when you ordered your shocks, and set your tire pressures at about street level, your brake bias at about what a normal car is, and the car is going to drive fine. Everything's going to be pretty wonderful. Okay, so now your car's all right, it's set up pretty well. Now let's take a look at if you were going to drive on a rough road versus a smooth road. What would you change? Now we're going to talk about, say you want to make this car a rally car versus a street car, or say it's already a rally car, but you're on, you're going to New England Forest Rally, which is pretty rough and bumpy, versus, the second day of STPR, which is much smoother and more flowing, or whatever it is. Rough versus smooth. What are you going to do? Spring rates and ride height. On a rough road, you go up with your ride height and down with your spring rates. Taller and softer on a rough road. That should make sense. On a smooth road, you're going to take a car out on the track. You're going to go lower ride height and stiffer spring rates. Lower, stiffer, out on a track should make sense. But there's different varying degrees of that. And changing those things as you need to is going to be really good. Same with sway bars. How much do you let the wheels articulate independently of each other? On a rougher road, a lot more. Rally cars, we use pretty small sway bars, if we use them at all. Everybody's got a different kind of technique, and I don't have any real secrets. You go look at different racing teams, they're all doing something a little different, but compared to what you're going to see on a track car, rally cars have soft sway bars. On a track car, or if you were on a pavement rally, you're going to run a much stiffer sway bar. This alignment stuff, caster, like I said, adjust as much caster as you can get basically for performance driving and leave it there, and you're going to be happy. So don't worry about caster anymore. Once you've got it set, forget it. Camber, as far as a rough versus smooth comparison, you're not going to adjust your camber, you're not going to adjust your toe. That's more for, we'll get into that with slippery versus grippy roads, but your alignment you're going to leave the same, pretty close to stock. Shock compression, high speed compression on a rough road, you're going to turn down so that your shocks are allowed to move with those high speed compressions that you see from driving on a rough bumpy road. A smoother road, you can turn that up so that the shocks don't compress too much and it doesn't bounce or do anything funny to you. So that should make sense. Soften the high speed compression up to take those impacts. If you soften it too much, you're gonna be letting them travel too fast, too hard, and bottoming out. Or, say it's soft and you hit a bump and it compresses a little, now you hit another bump, it compresses more when you hit every bump. If you hit 3 or 4 bumps in a row, go. And that's a rebound thing again too. You need that rebound there to make sure that doesn't happen. But typically softer on a rough road without going nuts with it, and harder, more slower on a smooth road as far as the damping on that, and that should be pretty good. Low speed compression, we're not going to adjust on a rough versus smooth basis. Shock rebound, same thing. The high speed rebound, you know, the ability of that shock to punch back down, we're going to turn down a little bit because we want that shock to move fast. And this is where people get tripped up. Turning it down doesn't mean you think I want the shock to travel fast down again to hit the ground after a bump, so you think more. That's not the case. So one easy way to think about it, and some shocks are like this, and pardon my silly drawing, but you've got the rabbit or the turtle, right? And that's what you'll kind of see, and that's the easy way to think about it if you're not sure. So when you turn something down, you're allowing the shock to move more freely and quickly. When you turn something up, you're adding resistance, you're damping that shock's ability. So think of it as faster or slower. So on a high speed rebound, when you're hitting bumps and you want that shock to travel back down quickly, turn it down a little means the shock moves faster because you're turning down the resistance of the shock. And that's how you get your tires to hit a bump quickly and then compress back down and hit the ground again quickly so you've got traction, is by doing that. Again, don't do that too much. There's usually, your shock will have some guidelines, but play with it, go a couple clicks at a time, find a rough road, and you know, see where you can get it to where it's compliant and it's soft, but not so soft it's crashing and bashing and stuff as you're going down the road. Low speed shock rebound, you wouldn't change on a rough versus smooth scenario. Tire pressures, you would change. You want more air in your tires to make them more rugged and last longer. On a rough road, you're hitting rocks, you're hitting bumps, you're hitting berms and curbs and banks and stuff, and sliding sideways into things. More tire pressure is going to help you a lot. On a smoother road, you can afford to use a little less, get a little better contact patch with the ground, a little more heat and compliance out of the tires, and drive faster. So brake bias, you wouldn't change for that. So say you set up a car, like I said, now you go down the list, and then if you're on a rough road and it's not behaving properly, go back up this list. Change your tire pressures, change your shock rebound, change your shock compression. If that's all not working, you know, pull your sway bar, put a lighter one, you know, go back up the list for whichever one of these you're trying to set up for, and make those adjustments to get the car to perform the way that you want it to. Now, let's take a look at a slippery road versus a grippy road. So say now you're set up for either, you know, rally or track racing. That's wonderful. Till it rains. Or the opposite, where it's just a really dry, you know, sunny, hot day and you've got great tires and they're really sticking to the ground. Well, what are you going to adjust on the car? So for a slippy road versus a grippy road, this is what you're looking at. If you know ahead of time and you're going to set the car up, a slippery road, lower spring rates, softer on the slippery, higher spring rates when it's grippy, harder suspension in general. Sway bars, same thing. On a slippery, ride height, you would go taller and softer. Grippy road, you would go lower and harder. So that's where you're at. Just like really the rough scenario, but there you go. Sway bars, when it's slippery, less sway bar. When it's grippery, probably not the last time I'll say that, more sway bar when the road is grippy and you have a lot of traction and grip and that sort of thing. Caster, same thing, you're not going to adjust it. Camber, we can adjust camber based on how slippery or grippy the road is. When you think about your front tires, if they're perfectly vertical, that means your contact patch with the ground is perfectly horizontal and it's meeting the road surface and getting maximum traction all the time. As you're driving slowly, that's a wonderful thing. As the speeds go up, when you turn into a corner, the car leans over significantly and the tires kind of do this, which means that contact patch on the ground all of a sudden isn't as good as it just was. So that's why people add camber, negative camber. They squish the bottom of their tires out slightly and the tops of them in, and so that when they turn into a corner and the car leans over, now you've got that contact patch on that outside front tire is really very good, and the car can hold more speed around that corner and the world's a happy place. So that's why I'm saying here you can adjust your camber, because on a slippery road you're not going that fast, you're not transferring that much weight. Having your tires pretty vertical is fine, where the more grip it is, the harder you're driving. Add in some of that negative camber and you'll get more performance out of the car. We're not saying a ton, a degree, 2, maybe 3 max. You know, you'll always see the one guy at the track that's got his tires like this, but you'll probably notice he's not the guy that's winning. And you'll also see, you know, real racing cars that have a lot of camber in them, but just know that tube frame cars and highly modified racing cars with totally different suspension geometry are set up to work differently. We're talking about normal production cars, so don't go too crazy with the camber because it's just not going to help you. You're not going to adjust any of this stuff. Slippery versus grippy. When it's slippery, soften your low speed compression. When it's grippy, make your low speed compression stiffer so that your suspension is softer and more compliant. When you brake on a snowy road or a gravel road, when you brake, you want it to transfer more weight and travel more freely. When it's grippy, when you brake, you want it to actually push those tires down onto that pavement more than just let the suspension compress. So you get more weight transfer, which helps you more by softening it on a slippery road, and having it stiffer pushes the tires down more on a grippy road. Hopefully that makes sense. You're not going to adjust the high speed compression or rebound in a slippery versus grippy situation. You're going to adjust the low speed shock compression like I just said, and same thing with the rebound. Softer, think of it softer on a soft surface and harder on a hard surface. And that's one easy way to do it in your head that it makes sense. Tire pressures, when it's slippery, lower your tire pressures. You'll get a bigger contact patch with the ground, you'll get a more compliant tire, it'll build up temperature faster and grip better. When it's a grippy surface, you go slightly higher tire pressure because you're going to overheat them if you go low and you get blowouts and wear them out too fast and everything else. And then brake bias. Typically, we would say the more grippy the road is, the more front brake you would use. On pavement, when I brake hard, what you're going to find is it transfers all of that weight and it pushes those front tires down. You get a tremendous amount of grip on those front tires. You can have those brakes working harder. When it's slippery, say you are out on gravel or on the snow, when you brake hard, yes, it transfers weight, and yes, the front tires do more braking, but having more rear brake also, so all 4 tires are braking, can help you. If you go too far and you go too much rear brake, when you brake, the rear tires are going to lock up and you're going to be squirrely all over the place. It's fun, rallycross, slower speeds, sure, but you don't want to be doing 90 miles an hour into a hairpin turn on snow with a lot of rear brake. You're going to have a soil your pants moment and probably crash. So be sensible about it, but that's where you're going to go with that. So you've probably noticed there might be an interplay where now if you're on a smooth grippy road, you got an idea what to do. If you're on a smooth but slippery road, wet pavement, a smooth gravel road, you know what to do. On a rough road that is slippery, a rough road that is grippy, you can mix in these settings and tweak your car so that it should perform pretty well. Now, say you've got the car set up. You know I'm going to be racing on a smooth track with a lot of grip. I've got my alignment and my shocks and everything in my ride height and all of the cars pretty happy. Go out and test the car. See what it's like. Go out to the event. And what you're going to find is either the car is going to understeer a lot, meaning when you turn in for a corner, nothing happens. It's just not turning and it's terrible. Or it oversteers a lot, meaning the back end's loose and it's sliding around on you too much. So what do you do there? And this basically spells that out really quickly. If your car is understeering too much, again, I would say go from the bottom of the list. You could either dial in some more rear brake or essentially less front brake to make that happen. Your tire pressures, lower the front tire pressures to get them to grip better, raise the rear tire pressures to get them to grip less. Low speed, shock rebound, softer in the front, harder in the rear. Same thing with your low speed compression, softer in the front, harder in the rear. Your toe. You could toe out slightly, and toeing out slightly means that the car is going to turn in better for you. If your toe is dead straight, the car is going to drive wonderfully, but if you toe out a little bit, what you're going to see is when you turn, it really turns, which is really nice. Autocross, lower speed, rallycross, toe out, it's a beautiful thing. High speeds, if you're running a lot of toe out, it's going to be too unstable. But this situation, we're saying your car tends to understeer, add some toe out, that may fix it. What are we doing here? Sway bars, less sway bar in the front, more sway bar in the rear. Ride height, lower in the front, taller in the rear. Spring rates, softer in the front, harder in the rear. Any and all of those things will help a car that understeers turn better and be more predictable going around the track. Say you have a car that oversteers, you're going to do exactly the opposite. So if you have a car that oversteers too much, brake bias goes back to the front more. Get more front brakes so it's more stable when you're braking. If your car oversteers too much, more tire pressure in the front, less in the rear. You get more grip on the back by lowering the tire pressures and less on the front. Low speed, rebound, and compression, same thing. If your car oversteers, go stiffer in the front, softer in the rear. Softer means more grip. Towing in. If your car turns and darts and it's unstable, tow in for stability. Same thing with sway bars. If you oversteer too much, more sway bar in the front, less in the rear. Ride height, more in the front, less in the rear. Spring rates, more in the front, less in the rear. So if your car oversteers too much, any one of those fixes will certainly help you. The thing, now that you've got kind of an idea of this, when you're setting a car up, you can go through all of this and do some testing. When you're really testing your car, if it's not performing quite the way you want, or even if it's pretty good and you just want to make it better, adjust one thing at a time. Don't go out there and say, oh man, this car's a basket case. I'm going to adjust my tire pressures and my rebound and compression and my alignment when I pull back into the pits, and then you go back out on the track. The car might be wonderful, it might be terrible, you have no idea what did it. It's like if you're cooking a soup and it doesn't taste good and you add 9 different things, it could be the best soup ever, it could be the worst soup ever, and you won't have any idea why. So adjust one thing at a time. If it's not behaving well, like I said, if you're on a track and you're time sensitive, track back up the list in this order. Change your brake bias. Did that help? Maybe, maybe not. Change your tire pressures. Does that help? Change your rebound. Change your compression. Change your alignment. Change your, go up the list. You know, but do something, go back out, drive the car, come back. Do something else, go back out, drive the car, come back. And it's not flat out wearing things out, and it's just really find a situation where if you're worried about, you know, high speed compression, find a bumpy road. And set your high speed compression. If you're worried about low speed compression, find some smooth arcing corners where you need to brake and turn and accelerate. So find somewhere to test that's productive and have a goal behind it, and work your way through, and you should be able to set a car up pretty well. Because I'm a little green in this, if I set up a race car, I go through the list in order, one thing at a time. You'll probably find an experienced crew chief, somebody that's been doing this for just decades and has a world of experience on this stuff. They can go ahead and make 4 changes at one time. They could go ahead and skip the list. They might see you out on the track and they might say, whoa, 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 I can tell you need more front sway bar, less rear sway bar. Or they might say, hey buddy, you know, what are you doing? Your car is way too high up. Drop that thing down a couple inches. But you know, as somebody that's green, you know, it's easy to go through the list and figure out what you want to change and make those changes one at a time. And the other thing with testing and racing is keep a logbook, keep record of this stuff, because what you're going to find is if you're out, you do a whole season of racing, you should have a whole season of data of suspension adjustments and alignment adjustments and ride height adjustments and tire pressures and tire temperatures and that sort of thing, so that when you go back to that racetrack again, or if you're somehow presented by similar conditions somewhere else, you might know, oh, you remember last year, man, it rained so much and it took us the whole race to to get the suspension adjusted right. Well, now you've got your book, boom, 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 boom. You can see, oh yeah, here's all our settings from that, so that when it's raining at the track, you can tweak everything back to where you were there. And if at the end of that race it's even better, you know, okay, hey, these are our really rainy settings, these are our wet settings, these are our dry settings, these are our, you know, with different tires and all the other stuff. But keep a good record of it. Otherwise, you're just kind of playing in the dark a little bit. So yeah, you guys wanted a car setup video? That's a car setup video. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos, go ahead and hit like down at the bottom, subscribe to the page, share with your friends. But definitely this is all pretty useful information, and it's kind of the black art of why some guys are out there winning races every time. You see them always tweaking their car and making little adjustments, and they got a little notepad. And then there's the other guys that just bolt stuff up and go out and hope. And hopefully this shines a little bit of light on that for you. Thanks for watching. Wyatt Knox at the Team O'Neill Rally School. Come on up anytime, check the place out. It's a super good time. And if you got any other ideas for videos, add them in down in the comments below and we'll make them.